Xuanji, Yangtze travels. The great river's bend embraces Wuchang. 10,000 households face Parrot Isle. On the painted boat, a spring sleep past dawn. In a dream, I'm the butterfly looking for flowers. So, we begin the poems that we're going to read from Xuanji, arguably the greatest Tang female poet, with this short heptasyllabic quatrain. So, before we start, we need to make a quick overview of Xuanji. She is a mid-late Tang poet, born about 843 from a commoner family in the capital, Chang'an. She had a very short life, only 26 years. When she was young, like 15, she got married to Li Yi, who was a candidate for the imperial examinations, who passed them. She then spent the early 20s, with him in several of his postings in the provinces, notably in Hubei. And there she wrote the poem that we have just read. And when her husband returned to the capital, she was a concubine. Scholar officials usually married women from the higher echelons of society, but they could marry concubines from commoner backgrounds. But for reasons not quite clear, some scholars speculate mostly jealousy of the main wife. Once Li Ji returned to Chang'an, they separated, and Xuanji joined the Taoist priesthood. We've already mentioned that the Taoist priesthood was an option open to Tang women. It granted them a lot of autonomy and power. She was in one of the best convents in the capital, Xuanji, which was, a place for women of the aristocracy. And Taoist priestesses had a lot of autonomy in the Tang. They weren't just like Buddhist nuns or our Western nuns. They could cultivate social relations and intellectual exchanges. They could even have paramours and relationships. I'm not sure if they could marry. I don't think they could while being Taoist priestesses. But they could have liaisons. And this was exactly the sort of thing that, as far as we know, Xuanji did. She wrote poetry, had intellectual and sentimental exchanges with other poets. She died very early, as we say, when she was 26 in 868. After accidentally having killed her maid Lu Qiao in a fit of rage and being executed as a consequence. Now, when we talked about Tang female poets, we emphasized how autonomous women were in the Tang, comparatively speaking. The Taoist priestess poet is like a trope from the Tang, but it's a reality. In later, more conservative and misogynistic periods, like during the Song and when Neo-Confucianism became the state orthodoxy, a retrospective view was pushed onto all these unruly women of the past. They were generally all described or put in the same bag as courtesans. This clearly seems not to be the case with Xuanji. And again, this is a biased lens for analyzing women who, in the social, economic, and cultural constellation that the Tang Dynasty period had more autonomy and were respected more than what would happen, in the Song and later dynasties. Okay, so having explained a little bit about Xuanji, she has about 50 or so poems surviving, so quite a significant output. And the poem we read today is part of a couple of two poems, Yang Xing Shou, two poems on Yangtze travels. And she would have composed them during a boat trip to Hubei, as we said, in between 858, 863. Her husband, Li Ji, served in, passed the examinations, and he served in different posts in Hubei. Hubei is just north of the Yangtze River, in what today would be like Middle China, and what in the Tang was southern China. There was still the extreme south, but the area of Hubei would have more or less overlapped with the old kingdom of Chu, which in traditional Tang poetry is the South, most of the time. One of the big cities in this area is Wuchang, which is the part or has been merged into today's better known Wuhan for reasons that you will all remember related to the COVID pandemic. And, this was a place that was, visited a lot by poets, making a poem about Parrot Island, which appears here, Jing Wuzhou, which is opposite the city of Wuchang, is a pretty staple, conventional trope in Tang poetry. So you have poems by Li Bai, by Du Fu, by Cui Hao, by Bai Juji, by Yuan Chen, all about this area opposite Wuchang. It's a landscape slightly melancholic, with the sandbank in the Yangtze being associated with exile, with separation, and the great watery drift of things. Water as a metaphor for the passage of time. This poem, very short, also includes a reference, which again could be a little bit trite, but she does an original take on it, on Xuanji, on the book of Master Xuanji includes a very celebrated image of Master Xuanji falling into sleep and not knowing, and dreaming that he was a butterfly, and then waking up and not being sure if he was a man who had dreamt he was a butterfly, or if he was a butterfly now dreaming that he was a man. This sort of post-awakeness, metaphysical doubting of the self and of perceptions, very typical of Taoist poets. So this is a quatrain, very short poem. Its main thrust is to describe a lovely scene in spring, which is bittersweet, because it's a scene of separation. During this trip, we imagine the poetic persona of Yu Xuanji is doing a boat trip near Wuchang alone, without her husband, and she composes this poem as, a nostalgic sighing for her absent paramour. Okay, let's take a look at the couplet. At the poem. It's 2 couplets. Let's go couplet by couplet. So first couplet was, the great river's bend embraces Wuchang. 10,000 households face Parrot Isle. So as usually happens in Tang poetry, we begin with a couplet that situates us in time and space. Here it doesn't indicate time. Time will be in the third line, but it indicates the place very, very specifically. So the speaker is in Wuchang and looking at both sides. On the one hand, there's the city, the 10,000 households on one side, and on the opposite, there's Parrot Island. So this already hints, again with the reference to the river embracing the town, that the speaker must be on the river, or is likely to be on the river, looking at both sides. Well, the title, Yangtze Travels, would suggest that we are in a boat. But again, this will be clarified in the third line. The river embraces Wuchang. So the poem hasn't yet explicitly made its sentimental, amorous overtones clear, but this image of a river embracing the town does convey this sort of pre-introduction to its affectionate topic, and it starts creating the mood. Yeah. Okay, so I think that's it. Let's continue with the second couplet. On the painted boat, a spring sleep past dawn. In a dream, I'm the butterfly, looking for flowers. So the second couplet, especially the third line, hones in on place and time. We are on the painted boat. Painted boats were, recreational boats used for navigating on lakes or on rivers, just for pleasure boats. And a spring sleep past dawn. This conveys, the leisurely context in which the poem is written. The poetic persona has been enjoying the sights, going along in this pleasure trip on this boat, and there's no pressure, there's no work. She has fallen asleep and has slept past dawn. Yeah, she's just woken up. Also, we get a spring sleep, so we know we're in spring. So now we know the place, now we know the time. Spring, usually associated in classical Chinese poetry with love, usually a bittersweet sweet tone, because in most poems there is an antithesis between the season of love, being the moment at which the poem is composed, and the separation between the lovers, negating what should be the expected correlation between the macrocosm and the microcosm of having the lovers together. Just as in nature, the season for love has begun and everything is, all lovers, natural lovers, are getting together. In a dream, I'm the butterfly looking for flowers. So, she has just woken up from the dream, and she had Xuanji's dream. She was a butterfly looking for flowers. The looking for flowers is interesting, and it adds a twist. So in the Chinese literary tradition, says Jin Huahua, who translates this poem for us, in the Chinese tradition, the butterfly is often an image for lovers, and the conventional image of seeking flowers usually has erotic overtones of males seeking girls. But here, remember, the poet is a woman, and there's no reason not to believe that she is adopting a female poetic persona for the poem, which implies a certain gender reversal, which matches what we know from the biographical background of this poem. That is to say, Yu Xuanji is separated from her husband, lover, and she is sighing for him. So he would be the flower, or the flower she would be looking at. Of course, one can make perhaps a more cynical view of trying to see this reference to flowers as to many men, but I think from the context it reads more as, even though flowers is used in the plural in this translation, the flowers are clearly, or are likely to be, her husband, giving what we know, as we said, about her background and the time in which the poem was composed. So this woman has a lot of degree of freedom. Not only can she write poems, and we know she will become a Taoist priestess later, we know she was well educated. And even though the Tang was a relatively liberal period for Chinese women, most Tang women were confined to their homes and residential places. Yu, on the contrary, has this freedom to travel from whatever her lodgings must have been, as the provincial official's concubine, through the different rivers and areas. And of course she is excited about this, and the other poem that she has is on this same topic, because remember there are two, is a more straightforward descriptive landscape poem describing the pleasures and the of the view, and also of drinking and chanting and going along. So very interesting piece, especially for the slight subversion of gender expectations.